Tarot, Qabalah, and Hermeticism. Modern Tarot Studies, a 19th Century Legacy. This is a book of philosophy, of metaphysics, describing a profound system of self-exploration embedded in 78 simple pictures known as the Tarot. And while these cards have long been publicly associated with odd cults and gypsy fortune tellers, they are increasingly capturing the attention of serious students who view the cards as a repository of a very complex system for the development of inner knowledge. Perhaps the inventors of the tarot cards intended that they should be understood as a graphic summation of the principles of the Qabalah, or perhaps not. At least there is no written evidence to suggest this, and the great Jewish scholar of the Qabalah, Gershom Scholem, is probably correct in his assertion, however deprecatory, that the connection was made by late 19th century English and French occultists. One way or the other, the interlock of tarot and Qabalah is so precise that the systems are mutually explanatory. And actually, the likelihood that the two systems developed independently gives far greater authority to the ideas of both because it points toward their mutual roots in universal truth. Yet, a great deal of nonsense has been written about both the tarot and the Qabalah, the sale of a large percentage of occult literature being a tribute to the public's gullibility. Thus, we should be grateful for the scholarly works of the past few decades. Scholem pioneered studies on the Jewish Qabalah, while the Western trends have been admirably researched by scholars such as Francis Yates, D.P. Walker, Francis King and Elick Howe. Serious research is increasingly disabusing us of incorrect notions about the roots of modern esotericism, and we should not be disturbed to see sand castles tumbling. If a system has inner merit, it will remain unscathed. We must also appreciate that what is known as the mysteries has apparently, until very recently, been transmitted through a secret oral tradition. Despite increased public interest, surprisingly little attention has been paid to the tarot by academia, though the cards are a veritable goldmine of art history and metaphysical philosophy. They should be of great interest to any medievalist, being clearly of the same temperament which produced the sculptural programs of the Gothic cathedrals. It is likely, also, that the cards in some way relate to the medieval books of emblemata and to those delightful and supposedly historical narratives called the chansons de gestes. What the tarot represents is an allegorical journey, each card being the experience of something, a universal energy, along the way, rather like the episodes in Dante's Divine Comedy, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress or even Tolkien's Trilogy of the Ring. And the idea of an adventuresome and perilous journey through unknown territory was typical of medieval literature. The analogy here is that to travel in the Middle Ages was as dangerous and difficult as to travel the inner paths of the mysteries. So one might agree with the monk who in 1377 suggested that the tarot was a mirror of 14th century society, saying that the cards represented the state of the world as it is now most excellently described and figured. Early decks show many of the virtues of liberal arts so important to the iconographic programs of Gothic humanism, some of which remain in today's standard tarot keys. Temperance is prudence, strength is fortitude, justice remains justice, etc. All of these cards are female, as the virtues and liberal arts were always represented, even an emperor was visible in the real society. That had been especially true since 1200, when the Pope crowned Charlemagne Holy Roman Emperor, in an attempt to strengthen Christianity by aligning it with a great secular power. And when we come to the High Priestess, we find that tradition related her to the legend of a female pope, circulating at just this time in history. The evidence for the 14th century origin of the cards is convincing, and hopefully some historian of medieval art history will pick up these fascinating threads and provide us with the real historical answers. On the other hand, a considerable number of well-trained esotericists insist that the cards are of very ancient origin. It is likely that these individuals are, through the tarot, encountering the shadows of other systems which have been used to approach the same universal energies. Such differentiation is often extremely difficult on the inner plane, which may explain why the experiences of so many students contradicts historical evidence. Of course, if the tarot can be of use to us in something so important as the development of inner understanding, study of its origins is little more than a pleasant side trip. The same is true for the very question of an original link between Qabalah and the tarot, although we are not here proposing that such a link was originally intended between tarot and the Hermetic Qabalah, on which this present book is based. That system, developed in Europe from the time of the Renaissance, is a westernized Qabalah. It grew from the improbable attempts of 15th century philosophers to incorporate the essence of Jewish mysticism into Christian thought. The history of the modification of these ideas by the philosophers of the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries is particularly interesting. But it is the 19th century developments which are most important for us. During that time the Hermetic Qabalah, largely de-Christianized, reached its fullest expression with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The leaders of that fraternity performed the remarkable task of unifying the disparate elements of the Western mystery tradition, Qabalah, Hermeticism, astrology, Neoplatonism, Zenochian magic, etc., in such a way that it formed a coherent method of inner exploration for the fin de siècle temperament. There are few modern schools of Western esoteric thought which have not been affected in some way by the developments of that group, and as one discusses Hermetic Kabbalism, one of necessity refers to the Golden Dawn as its primary modern expression. Hermetic Qabalah and Golden Dawn must be considered virtually synonymous. Nor is it significant whether the esoteric tenets of this group were handed down secretly for generations, or if they were meticulously culled from ancient manuscripts in the British Museum. The authority of any group derives entirely from its inner contacts. The secret tradition, the mysteries, or whatever this may be called, can be tapped into by anyone. An individual or group becomes a part of an ancient tradition by contacting inner teachers in that tradition, and it would certainly appear that the decks used to illustrate this book are the result of such inner contact. The three key decks of the modern era were all produced by members of that fraternity. The Golden Dawn Tarot, designed by MacGregor Mathers, the Rider-Waite deck, designed by A.E. Waite, and the Thoth Tarot designed by Aleister Crowley. A fourth major deck, already mentioned, is that of Paul Case for the O.T.O. His version is an excellent correction of that issued by Waite. The Waite deck, one of the most popular ever published, seems to have been designed with such concern for oaths of membership in the order that it remains entirely exoteric. It is included in the hope that those who may have chosen to study the deck may find its often admirable, occasionally unacceptable symbolism more useful when considered from the standpoint of the Hermetic Qabalah. The Golden Dawn Tarot is an esoteric deck intended for the private use of members of the order. Crowley's deck is also esoteric in that it conceals the 19th century order's symbolism. Certainly, Crowley's Thoth Tarot is the most original recent contribution to tarot studies. Unfortunately, neither Crowley nor Mathers has received appropriate credit for their work with the tarot. And because of their occasionally outrageous behavior, both men have been fair game for social historians. Moreover, their scholarly limitations have made them the butt of jokes by meticulous researchers on the Hebrew Qabalah. But a study of any mystery tradition, unless it be purely historical, requires that preconceived notions be set aside and that the system be judged solely on the merit of its efficacy. One must use the word efficacy because that is the only valid measure of a metaphysical system. Does it work? But how do we establish whether it works or not? The answer to these questions is certainly not to be found through the present methods of the sciences or of the humanities, which are predicated on those of science. Data is collected and analyzed empirically. And since those ideas known as the mysteries do not lend themselves to this sort of attack, being in high degree irrational, they may be denigrated even by historians. Many knowledgeable scholars perceive late 19th century Hermetic Kabbalism as only a romantic and fanciful offshoot of Hebrew Kabbalism, unworthy of the sort of research devoted to esoteric Judaism. And the social toning of the materials as a cult adds to the wall of preconceptions and prejudgments. The problem arises in that to study any aspect of the mysteries the investigator must himself become a part of the system. He must evaluate it from the inside, which may make it appear that he has abrogated investigative objectivity. Today's academicism does not allow for the acquisition of knowledge through intuition and psychism, an attitude placing it in paradoxical contradiction to a high proportion of those great thinkers whom the humanities study and purport to revere. In the humanities, the universities have deteriorated it into observers of, rather than participants in, the development of man's creative and intellectual faculties. A more serious problem, in terms of the cautious dissemination of occult ideas, is that any proofs which may emerge are valid only for the investigator himself. Carl Jung expressed this by stating that only the psyche can know the psyche. The fact is, however, that those who travel the inner paths, using any given system, have parallel experiences. The encounter of, for example, the energies symbolized by the universe card theoretically produces the same basic experience for everyone. It should be quickly added, however, that through what is known as the astral level of consciousness, one functions within the confines of occultus. A Catholic mystic will learn the same lessons through the symbolism of Christianity that a Kabbalist learns through the symbolism of the tree of life. The universal energies are actually formless, yet we perceive them in the guise of our chosen system. It is at the level of the Christ-Buddha-Krishna intelligence that the unity of all systems becomes apparent, and we are freed into pure consciousness. Thus, in these terms, one may appreciate that when the question is asked, does the system work? It means Is the symbolic structure of the system representative of universal truths, sufficient to carry one beyond the system itself? In the case of the Hermetic Kabbalah and its practical tool, the tarot, there can be no doubt. This is an extremely potent system, particularly in that it may be incorporated into any system or religion in which the student chooses to function. Of course, no one is asked to accept this statement on face value. Blind acceptance of anything whatsoever is contrary to the Kabbalistic method. The search for truth. The chances are good that most readers of this book are disillusioned with both organized religion and science. Neither seems to provide the insight into our human condition demanded by an increased and worldwide sophistication. We have learned so much through the wonders of technology and modern communications that the explanations of our fathers appear more placebo than panacea. Many of those so disillusioned turn to occultism and mysticism in the hope of finding broader meaning and truth. They do so in the essential belief that direct knowledge of the cosmic order, enlightenment, is possible. The mystery schools teach that what we can see, touch and feel presents us with only a relative reality. Beyond that which is considered real by most people are worlds of an even greater reality, which every individual has the capacity to explore. Enlightenment means emergence from the darkness of our limited sense perceptions and thought framework into a consciousness of the greater reality. It is of that from which we are born, and into this that we shall return at the end of our brief life cycle. The Kabbalah is a system once traditionally claimed, prior to the work of Shalom, to have been given to Adam by God, to have been the province of a few chosen adepts, until it became Hellenized by the Greeks and began to form a subcurrent of Western civilization. The value of the system is that it divides the universe into specific categories, allowing for the establishment of correspondences between all cults and religions. The tarot cards, also, may be equated with the major aspects of most religious systems. Esoteric tradition, as represented by the tarot, makes some very basic statements about man and the nature of the universe, which is his ultimate environment. It says that there is a perfect order which one has the capacity to perceive, and that there is no such thing as an accident. For every movement of every leaf on every tree there is a reason, and every movement of everything is interrelated. Separateness is a myth. We are all part of one great unity. These principles have been expressed for thousands of years and in thousands of ways. And somehow, as expressed, they are always so simple. The concept that all is one, and we are all has a certain poetry to it. It may strike a deep-rooted chord and then be quickly forgotten. But there is a feeling that the statement has merit. The words of prophets may imbue us with a strange and momentary silence, as if our minds are straining to recall something. Students may respond in this way to a small book from 1912 called the Qabalah. This work involves all of the key principles of tarot and purports to sum up ancient Hermeticism. The ideas here are actually the same sorts of Gnostic thought that produced the Kabbalah. Hermeticism and Kabbalah both date from the period of earliest Christianity. When we describe the Hermetic Kabbalah, we mean the later amalgam of the principles of both. The Qabalah gives 7 Hermetic principles. These are, quite literally, a distillation of the universal principles on which the tarot is based and deserve to be the subject of every student's meditation. They are 1. The principle of mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. 2. The principle of correspondence. As above, so below, as below, so above. 3. The principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. 4. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites, like and unlike are the same, opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree, extremes meet, all truths are but half-truths, all paradoxes may be reconciled. 5. The principle of rhythm. Everything flows, out and in, everything has its tides, all things rise and fall, the pendulum swing manifests in everything, the measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left, rhythm compensates. 6. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause, everything happens according to law, chance is but a name for law not recognized, there are many planes of caution, but nothing escapes the law. 7. The principle of gender. Gender is in everything, everything has its masculine and its feminine principles, gender manifests on all planes. The doctrine that our universe is so precisely ordered is basic to the tarot, as is the idea that the tarot images accurately symbolize the very framework of the universe. As MacGregor Mathers stated, I have not only transcribed the symbolism, but have tested, studied, compared and examined it both clairvoyantly and in other ways. The result has been to show me how absolutely correct the symbolism of the book T meaning tarot is, and how exactly it represents the occult forces of the universe. Eliphas Levi described the tarot in even more flamboyant terms. Although it is popular in a sense and may be found everywhere, this is of almost occult and unknown, because it is the key to the rest. It is, in truth, a monumental and extraordinary work, strong and simple as the architecture of the pyramids, and consequently enduring like those, a book which is a summary of all sciences, which can resolve all problems by its infinite combinations, which speaks by evoking thought. It is an inspirer and moderator of all possible conceptions, and the masterpiece perhaps of the human mind. It is to be counted unquestionably among the great gifts bequeathed to us by antiquity. Levi was among the first to declare publicly that the tarot was more than merely a quaint device for telling fortunes, and that it was virtually the key to all occult science. Clearly, for one to take this approach to the tarot requires a considerable amount of faith. But this should be a faith which is understood to represent merely a suspension of judgment. One who fails to exercise rational judgment, or who accepts any esoteric principle unquestioningly, is a poor candidate for inner development. We must engage our every capacity, and the capacity to reason is our greatest protection against being led astray in these matters. One might also suggest that the methods of the Hermetic Qabalah will be particularly attractive to those who are natively intellectual, artistic, or both. These methods are not for everyone, and to study them efficiently requires a significant commitment. The pursuit of any specific method of spiritual development represents a choice. And herein lies another important principle. This principle is frequently encountered in popular literature, couched in aphoristic terms such as, "We are masters of our own destiny," or "The stars impel, they do not compel." We are, in fact, the authors of our every experience, from the non-accident of our birth and the parents whom we choose, to the very time and circumstances of our death. Some of the inspired religious literature of the West hints at this idea. It is a principle which has been stated openly and explicitly in Eastern religions for thousands of years. This is not an easy concept to accept, because it lays full credit or blame for all that occurs in our lives squarely on our own shoulders. But this does not imply that we are necessarily aware of the decision-making process. That is the province of the higher self, that spiritual part of ourselves which endures, while the personalities molded for each successive incarnation dissipate and cease to be, save as they represent experience assimilated by the higher self. The pursuit of enlightenment is the pursuit of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel aspect of the higher self. This means the development of a conscious awareness of, and contact with, an innermost spiritual nature which is the essence of God. The goal is a lofty one. The decision to pursue it seriously, as well as the means of pursuit, pivotal choices. And here one must not lose sight of the fact that whatever the chosen path, whether that be tarot or yoga or Catholic mysticism, it is a means of self-exploration, and not an end in itself. Yet as Jung points out, some people try to escape into a system. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls. They will practice Indian yoga in all its exercises, observe a strict regimen of diet, learn theosophy by heart, or mechanically repeat mystic texts from the literature of the whole world, all because they cannot get on with themselves and have not the slightest faith that anything useful could ever come out of their own souls. It is a sad fact that many disturbed people are attracted to all forms of occult work. These are people who look for an escape but do not find it. An unbalanced personality, unable to cope with its own earthly environment, will find little solace in the tarot or in any other facet of the mysteries. Instead, such persons may find esoteric research very disconcerting, as they discover themselves required to face aspects of their personalities with which they cannot cope, or increasingly immersed in their own fantasies and losing touch with reality. The dawning awareness of the truth of the universal order is difficult for the most balanced personality because it involves concepts that totally refute what most people believe themselves to be. There is a cause and effect here, which is the reason that so many esoteric works include a warning. Anyone can learn to manipulate the kundalini forces of their own body and open the channels by which light descends. The methods are basically very simple and are openly described in works such as Rigardi's Middle Pillar and his Foundations of Practical Magic. Yet if the basic preparatory work has been ignored or done casually, the result may be a systemic imbalance rather than balance and increased vitality and awareness. These dangers are one reason that the mysteries maintained strict secrecy for so many centuries. Tradition states that the mysteries maintained secrecy as a matter of keeping sacred ideas from the profane, although we appreciate that in some ages past secrecy has also kept the metaphysician from being burned at the stake. But those who have been the guardians of the orally transmitted mystery tradition over the centuries have also understood the responsibility of conveying practical techniques to those who might misunderstand or misapply the principles of their use. Even today one could argue reasonably that the practical esoteric techniques should be kept secret, although so much has now been published that the point is purely moot. And the fact is that there are no real secrets, as most people understand the word. Herein lies the crux of all occultism, mysticism and esoteric religion. In fact, one important secret is so simple that it can be conveyed in a single paragraph. What is called enlightenment depends on the physical opening of channels so that the consciousness of the personality can directly contact the consciousness of the greater universe. What this means is a manipulation of vibrations within the body and a subtle change in physiochemistry. It is all a form of yoga, where one experiences what feels like an electromagnetic current in the body. Everyone has felt this current, and anyone can learn to manipulate it. Moreover, this has nothing whatsoever to do with the school of mysticism or occultism in which one operates. The directive "inflame thyself with prayer," meaning to excite the inner currents of the body, is the practical essence of Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and every legitimate form of mystery religion or cult. To the technique of manipulation of body energies, the Hermetic Qabalah adds a program of inner visualization. One begins by imagining an inner scene, a tightly created and directed daydream. Soon, however, one discovers that what is happening is not his own invention. The tarot is, of course, ideal for this kind of visualization, known as path working or rising on the planes. To focus on any given key is to turn attention to a specific intelligent energy as anthropomorphized in a card. This very focus of attention tends to affect an unconscious link with the energy which the card symbolizes. This is not to suggest, however, that the tarot offers any shortcuts, for it does not. One who chooses to study the tarot by the Kabbalistic method must do so with discretion, sensitivity, completeness and acceptance of a certain disciplined boredom until positive results are obtained, which may take years. Those who make this system work do so by attention to meditative exercises without concern for result. But results do come, and one begins to perceive the entire system very differently, appreciating the fluidity with which the cards must be interpreted. A key may have several possible interpretations, some even apparently contradictory, particularly when it represents a path on the upper levels of the tree of life. Thus, the values inherent in a card can never be attributed to a few catchphrases easily memorized. Aleister Crowley, in his Book of Thoth, makes the point that what he can say about a card may either represent a small part of its meaning or may not necessarily appear to make sense. Often, in that work, Crowley finds a card so profound that he must resort to the word symbols of poetry to approach its most serious implications. He was also uniquely honest in his assertion, published in the Confessions of Aleister Crowley, that he did not completely understand all of the cards. He wrote, "The true significance of the O.T.O of Tahuti, or tarot trumps, also awaits full understanding. I have satisfied myself that these 22 cards compose a complete system of hieroglyphs representing the total energies of the universe. In the case of some cards presumably referring to his own deck, I have succeeded in restoring the original form and giving a complete account of their meaning. Others, however, I understand imperfectly, and of some few I have at present obtained no more than a general idea." Certainly, the tarot offers us great potential for self-deception. We can believe we have understood some aspect of the study, yet still be working within a very personal and distorted framework. For this reason, it is best to refer, at every step of the learning experience, to the time-honored documents on the subject. For the tarot, this means the Sefer Yetzirah, a very brief work by which we relate the Hebrew letters to the tarot keys. Another great work is the source book of the Jewish Qabalah, the Zohar, a mystical commentary in many volumes, which has never been fully translated into a European language. The greatest Kabbalistic work of all is the Pentateuch of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. The study of the first 4 books, in Hebrew, and on the basis of numerology, is the essence of Jewish Qabalah. On the surface all of this may seem unapproachably complex. But the intellectual Qabalah, as opposed to the practical work, is easily understood by anyone willing to consider it with the intensity and diligence that one would apply to the learning of a new language. The Qabalah is essentially artificial. It is a defining pattern imposed on qualities which would otherwise be too impossibly fluid to grasp. By example, one could cite the idea of periodization in history. There is, obviously, no line of demarcation between the centuries. But to place blocks of ideas and social styles within the brackets arbitrarily established as the 18th, 19th or 20th centuries is useful. The Golden Dawn. It is no coincidence that the 3 most important tarot decks of the modern era, those of Waite, Crowley and the Golden Dawn, were produced by members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That fraternity, the intellectual heir of the Renaissance Kabbalists and Baroque Rosicrucians, placed greater emphasis on the tarot than any other group whose activities have yet been made public. Their attitude that the tarot synthesizes the principles of the Hermetic Qabalah has been pivotal to modern esoteric studies. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, particularly insofar as it represented a social phenomenon, is best viewed against the backdrop of its own period. London today is a sprawling and sophisticated metropolis, a center for international trade and communications. Even the traditional reserve of the English themselves does not serve to mask the vitality and rapidity of life there. London of the 1890s was more tranquil and picturesque. One imagines streets lined with trees and quaint shops, horse-drawn carriages moving leisurely across cobblestone streets carrying ladies in long gowns and gentlemen in top hats. The tranquil quality of some of London's streets, however, was in sharp contrast to the squalor of the same city's slums, or to the factory areas of the emerging industrial nation ruled by Queen Victoria. This was a time and place of great polarities. This was the society which acted as a crucible for the ideas of the modern Hermetic Qabalah, a society very different in tone and quality from that which we know today. The Order of the Golden Dawn emerged during one of the most interesting periods of modern history, the fin de siècle, la Belle Époque. It was a time when people were beginning to assess and place in perspective a great deal of knowledge gained in previous decades. Many historians view the extraordinary interest in occultism at that time as a reaction against industrialization and its concomitant materialism. There was definitely a fear in some quarters that machine technology might overwhelm and destroy individuality. Others tend to view the interest in esoteric matters as the result of politically based contact with Eastern ideas relating to England's involvement in India and the subsequent birth of theosophy. Yet, however one may choose to assess the development of occultism in the late 19th century, like the other threads of the social fabric, it represented the fruit of generations of exploration. The same may be said, at this time, for the sciences, for politics, for industry, and for all phases of the arts. Expressed in another way, there was more change in human lifestyle and philosophy at the turn of this century than at any other time in history. It was overwhelming, it was rapid, but it did not happen overnight. An analogy could be made with a balloon that fills with air slowly, but bursts suddenly. The Golden Dawn was a bursting forth of pressure that had begun to build in the Kabbalistic philosophies of the Renaissance. Those who criticize the Golden Dawn for its theatricality should appreciate that it emerged from much the same social forces which were producing the modern theater, to say nothing of modern literature, modern art and modern music. This was the age of Ibsen, of Stravinsky, of Henry Bergson, Mrs. Mather's brother, of William Morris, of Oscar Wilde, of Rimbaud and Verlaine, of Van Gogh and Gauguin. It is in this light that the order is best understood. What the order did, essentially, was to collect, focus and expand upon all of the previous experience of the Western mystery tradition. The elements of the Hermetic Qabalah were very different after undergoing the refinements and critical definitions of the Golden Dawn. It was in 1888 that the order was founded under the joint leadership of William Wynne Westcott, S. L. MacGregor Mathers and W. R. Woodman. Its authority, as well as its claim to have descended from Christian Rosenkreutz, father of Rosicrucianism, was based on a mysterious set of cipher manuscripts which came into Westcott's hands in 1887. The story is very complicated and made even more so by the likelihood that at least some of the materials issued to the members by Mathers et al. And claimed by them to be of great antiquity were their own invention. The ancient cipher manuscripts were, suspiciously, in English, translated into a very simple cipher for letter code invented by the abbot Trithemius, patron of Agrippa, in the 16th century. These pages outline the rituals and grade structure of an occult fraternity and supposedly originated in Germany. And while there is a serious question about the authenticity of these documents, they were definitely written by one with a profound knowledge of occult tradition. It was, at any event, on the basis of this claimed authority that members were solicited for the new order. They came from a wide range of pursuits and included, by 1890, William Butler Yeats, Annie Horniman and the actress Florence Farr. A.E. Waite was a member of the group for somewhat more than a year. Later he rejoined but eventually wrote disparagingly of his experiences with the fraternity. It was in 1892 that Mathers became sole chief, and the second, or inner order, offering the grade of Adeptus Minor, was established. Mathers was a skillful organizer, though perhaps addicted to small deceits aimed at aggrandizing his own image or adding to the luster of the order in the eyes of its members. Serious problems began to appear in 1895, stemming largely from Mathers' autocratic leadership. While Mathers claimed to be in contact with 3 secret chiefs, unseen masters who guided the course of the order, the members had become increasingly reluctant to accept Mathers' statements on faith. Aleister Crowley joined the order in November of 1898 and was soon apprenticed to the legendary Alan Bennett. He also earned the respect of Mathers for his intelligence and talent for esoteric work. But the same qualities of investigative independence, albeit genius, which so attracted Bennett and Mathers, tended to be viewed as abrasive by other members. In 1899, after MacGregor and Moyna Mathers had moved to Paris to establish a continental branch of the order, the leaders of the London Temple decided to reject Crowley's application for membership in the Second Order. That decision led ultimately to the final disintegration of the order as it had been originally. In Paris, Mathers conferred the Adeptus Minor degree on Crowley. But this incurred the wrath of the London members, who refused to accept the initiation as valid and voted to expel Mathers himself from the order. Undaunted, Mathers proceeded to found a new group. Others, including Crowley, eventually did the same, each claiming that his fraternity was authentic and in contact with the secret chiefs. Thus, the teaching of the order was disseminated around the world as splinter groups formed in England, America and other countries. The methods of the became public knowledge between the years 1937 and 1940, when Israel Regardie's 4-volume Golden Dawn appeared. This work contains all of the order's significant lectures and rituals, as well as a very thorough explanation of their underlying principles. The Golden Dawn Tarot. There is only one known, published, reference to the origin of the Golden Dawn Tarot. This appears in the 1945 autobiography of Irish artist and poet Ella Young. In the book, Flowering Dusk, she describes a visit to the home of the Mathers, having been brought there by Maud Gonne, a member of the order. Maud Gonne had herself been brought into the group by William Butler Yeats, who courted her unsuccessfully for many years. Ella Young describes having been attracted to some large illustrations of Egyptian gods executed in paper mosaic and claimed by MacGregor Mathers to have been done by him in one night. When we are in the quiet street again, I say to Maud Gonne, how can he expect us to believe that he did those mosaics in one night? I think it quite likely that he did. But to cut those strips of paper, sort the colors, glue them into position. To say nothing of designing and drawing the figures, it seems to be impossible. He can do things like that. One time he made up his mind that the society should have tarot cards. At headquarters he took a packet of white cards, asked a member to mark them, went into an inner room for a little while, and came out with those marked cards. The tarot signs were painted on them. The cards used by the society are copied from the pack. I had seen those cards. To produce them at short notice while you wait was a feat equaling the mosaics. It appears that a finished deck was painted by Mrs. Mathers, a very accomplished artist. Her deck was subsequently lent to members of the inner order, who were required to copy it by hand. This was the procedure followed by the late Golden Dawn Lodge to which Israel Regardie belonged, the Stella Matutina, although at the time preparation of a tarot deck was optional. Photographs of Regardie's deck, the original having been stolen, were the basis of the Golden Dawn Tarot, painted by Robert Wang under Regardie's direction and published in 1978. The Rider-Waite deck in 1910. Arthur Edward Waite and the artist Pamela Coleman Smith produced what has become the most popular tarot deck in history, generally called the Rider deck after his publisher, William Rider and Son. The production of this deck is discussed by Waite in his autobiography, Shadows of Life and Thought. The Secret Tradition in Gosha was my first considerable work bearing the Rider imprint, but it was preceded in 1910 by a delightful experiment with the so-called tarot divinatory cards, otherwise denominated the Book of Thoth, in the high fantasia of my old friend Eliphaz Levi. Now, in those days there was a most imaginative and abnormally psychic artist named Pamela Coleman Smith, who had drifted into the Golden Dawn and loved its ceremonies as transformed by myself without pretending or indeed attempting to understand their subsurface consequence. It seemed to some of us in the circle that there was a draftsman among us who, under proper guidance, could produce a tarot with an appeal in the world of art and a suggestion of significance beyond the symbols, which would put on them another construction than had ever been dreamed by those who, through many generations, had produced and used them for mere divinatory purposes. My province was to see that the designs, especially those of the important trumps major, kept that in the hiddenness which belonged to certain greater mysteries in the paths of which I was traveling. I am not of course intimating that the Golden Dawn had at that time any deep understanding by inheritance of tarot cards, but, if I may so say, it was getting to know under my auspices that their symbols, or some at least among them, were gates which opened on realms of vision beyond occult dreams. I saw to it therefore that Pamela Coleman Smith should not be picking up casually any floating images from my own or another mind. She had to be spoon-fed carefully over the priestess card, over that which is called the fool, and over the hanged man. If anyone feels drawn in these days to the serious consideration of tarot symbolism, they will do well to select the codex of colored cards produced under my supervision by Miss Pamela Coleman Smith. Embedded here are two ideas which may help to explain Waite's early estrangement from the Order of the Golden Dawn. He suggests that he not only transformed the Golden Dawn ceremonies, but that it was he who introduced the members to the real meaning of tarot. Such pronouncements made him few friends and stimulated Aleister Crowley to publish some very vitriolic comments. One article in the Equinox was a tongue-in-cheek obituary of the still very much alive Waite, complete with heavy black borders on every page. The title of the article was Dead Waite. It began, "It is with the deepest feeling that we record the passing over of the aged saint known on earth as Arthur Edward Waite." The article continues with a mock life story. The career of Arthur Edward Waite was largely determined by his father's fine perception. "Ned, my lad," said he when the future saint was barely 6 years of age, "brains are not your long suit, I can see. But it doesn't matter. If you can't be wise, look wise." Crowley was a bitter adversary, a thorn in Waite's side for decades. But Waite may actually have had the last laugh, for in his lengthy autobiography, he has not mentioned the name of Crowley even once. Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. The Crowley deck has had a long and complex history. Not only did it take Lady Frieda Harris 5 years to paint the cards, but the completed work remained unpublished for 25 years. The first, and little-known, printing was done privately by Carr Collins and his Texas-based Sangreal Foundation. This was a very poor printing, in one color. It was not until 1969 that an American publisher of occult books arranged for the first color edition, the actual printing being done in Hong Kong. Undoubtedly, Lady Harris, who had insisted that only the English printer of government postage stamps would be allowed to produce the deck, would have been very disappointed, if not sickened, by these editions. In 1979 the cards were finally published in an edition conforming to the highest standards of reproduction. Yet it was not without serious obstacles that the cards appeared. In the interim between the Sangreal and the corrected edition, the curator of the collection of Crowley documents housed at the Courtauld Institute in London refused to allow the original paintings to be photographed. The large collection of Crowleyana, donated to the Courtauld by Gerald York, had been the object of numerous thefts, and the museum was becoming increasingly cautious about allowing access to these materials. It was more than 2 years after negotiations began between Weissers and the Courtauld that the expertly produced Thoth Tarot finally appeared. The project of painting the cards was begun in 1938 and was completed in 1943, as Lady Harris described in a lecture to the Tomorrow Club, which remains the only public statement of her role in developing the deck. In despair of arriving at any lucidity, I will tell you how it happened that I painted these cards. I was interested in the tarot after reading Ouspensky's book, The Model of the Universe. I could find very little information or research about it until I met Crowley. He had studied the cards seriously for 40 years. I asked him to help me, and with great patience and courtesy he did so, and we tottered along for 5 years, wrestling with the accumulated mass of tradition emanating from sources such as Freemasons, alchemists, Rosicrucians, Kabbalists, magicians, geometricians, mathematicians, symbolists, diviners, numerologists, druids, spiritualists, psychologists, philologists, Buddhists, togas, psychoanalysts, astrologers, even heraldry, all of whom have left traces on the symbols employed. From these multitudes, we endeavored to reinstate the cards in their original sacred simple forms and, in addition, indicate the new eon of Horus, a terrifying apparition. The cards push me off my feet, and I get into a train of thought that can only be expressed in gasps and hiccups. I have never tried to paint them with the help of automatic writing, trances, seances, mediums, autosuggestions, drugs, absent treatment, yoga, meditation, mysterious masters, or any other emotional approach of inspiration. They are the result of hard work, honest investigation, and common sense, which I believe are the true magics, and were done in the open air and sunshine of the country. Lady Harris's comments reflect the deep inner exploration necessary to produce an occult work of this magnitude. Indeed, any artist who has painted an entire tarot deck would agree with one of her more frustrated comments. Sometimes when I am sufficiently crushed by all these meanings, I say in the words of Alice in Wonderland, "Who cares for you? You're nothing but a pack of cards." Book T. The Golden Dawn, Waite, and Crowley decks are agreed in their conceptual dependence on the principles of Book T, a set of tarot papers issued to members of the Inner Lodge of the Order of the Golden Dawn. Principal suggestion of the papers is that the key to the tarot is the Qabalah and the Tree of Life. Certainly, without some basic knowledge of the symbols of the Qabalah, the modern decks illustrated here would be incomprehensible. One must also know the Hebrew alphabet, since in its use for esoteric studies, each Hebrew letter is a symbol, embodying a block of concepts. All that is implied by the symbolic picture of the fool is also implied by the Hebrew letter Aleph. It is one of the peculiarities of the mysteries that many aspects of the study are so profound that one symbol can be explained only in terms of another, and a student buys into the circle with the symbol which he best understands. Book T, a complex presentation of tarot symbols, elaborates a formula originally given in the cipher manuscripts. This includes the order of trumps and the relationship of the trumps to Hebrew letters. Most significant is the extraordinary reverence accorded the tarot. It was to be understood that Book T, the tarot, is the secret key not only to the Hermetic Qabalah, but to all of Western esotericism. Heru, the great angel, is set over the operations of the secret wisdom. What thou seest write in a book, and send it unto the 7 abodes that are in Asiah. And I saw in the right hand of him that sat upon the throne a book sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the books and to loose the seals thereof. The passage with which Book T is prefaced certainly represents the attitude of the order toward its tarot deck. The lines are from the Revelation of St. John the Divine, chapter 5. The saint, having risen into the celestial realm, is shown a scroll and is told that none on the earth is worthy to open it. The Lamb of God, however, having sacrificed his blood for mankind, is deemed worthy. The suggestion is that the tarot is the book spoken of in Revelation and is the key to the universe. Of course, it is not the tarot deck per se that constitutes what is called Book T. The implication, rather, is that the key to the cosmos is our perception of the underlying pattern of which the tarot deck is an external symbol. But this book, or set of universal patterns, is open to no man of this earth. It can be opened only by the Lamb of God, who is Christ Buddha Osiris in this context. Only those who have been initiated into the Christ center of the Qabalah, Tifereth, can fully understand the tarot. Here the initiation of Tifereth may be understood as a sacrifice of man's blood, in that it involves a losing of the personality self as it has been previously known. Moreover, we find that it is the Book T described in the Rosicrucian documents as having been found in the hand of Christian Rosenkreutz when his body was discovered perfectly preserved in the vault. The Order of the Golden Dawn claimed a direct line of descent from Rosenkreutz and apparently wanted to suggest that they were in possession of the greatest secret of the original Rosicrucians. One must therefore conclude that the order viewed the tarot as the symbolic receptacle of its primary and most secret teaching. The member received information on tarot, as well as almost everything else of importance, after having passed through the initiation for the grade of Adeptus Minor. This grade related to Tifereth, the center of Christ and other sacrificed gods. Thus, it was not until the member assumed the nature of the Lamb of God, even being symbolically crucified in the ritual, that he was deemed worthy of opening the seals on the scroll of Revelation, Book T, the tarot, or whatever the patterns of the cosmos might be called. What is important is not the books themselves, but our ability to read them. That is the breaking of the seals.